Notice there isn't a traditional set of notes for you to take notes on, but in this lesson, 3.8, I am going to show you how to use Google Sheets to create different data representations. So if you will go to Chapter 3 folder on Schoology and click on this Creating Data Representation Practice assignment, and then click on the link that's in the assignment. And why don't you pause the video while you get that going. And then when you get to this page, you are going to need to hit File and make a copy so that you have editing rights. So again, why don't you hit File, make a copy, and pause the video while you wait for that to happen. And the three different representations that I'm going to show you how to create on Google is a bar graph, a pie chart, and a histogram. And so if you look at the bottom of your sheet here, you will see the three different tabs. For the three tabs, you see four different tabs. One is data. I just gave you that data for the purpose of just having it for now. But the data that we're going to use is already copy and pasted in here. Okay. So when we're making a bar graph, the first thing that we want to think about again is when we're making these data representations, a bar graph and a histogram are two very similar data representations, but two different, very, very different ways to use them. And so I'm going to take test scores and I want to make a graph of the test scores. Now, again, with a test, you're going to have many different scores. You're going to have some that repeat, but you're going to also have many different scores. And so if I'm making a bar graph, it's not totally realistic to make a bar to represent each possible score. And so rather than making a bar graph to represent each possible score, I'm going to make a bar graph that represents the different letter grades. So A, B, C, D, and F, and how many people fell in that letter grade. Now, in this case, I have collected that data for you. So given or using this data over here, I've figured out how many people got A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. And so let's make a bar graph. So your homework will be set up in the very same exact way. It'll just be different numbers. And so just pointing out some of these areas for you. So here on the right side half of the screen, you'll see the directions. It says, before going to steps B and C, please make a duplicate sheet. You should have already done that. A duplicate sheet. I've already done that for you. Part B, create a separate bar graph for each test that displays each test score. So what that means is I want to take the distribution for test 1 and I want to make a bar graph. Okay, so highlight that data set just like I did. Just start in Great Earn, go over to test 1 and then drop down so you have all that information. Then go to Insert and then scroll down to Chart. Okay, and while I'm thinking about it, just remember that at any point you can pause the video if you need to slow down. As of right now, I've just highlighted the data and then went to Insert and then Chart. And so when you hit that, this pops up on the right side, okay? Where you have, if you click on where it says Column Chart, it defaults it to that. So the one thing that Google does that's nice is it kind of defaults and it tries to read and assume what you want. And so we actually already have kind of the bar graph that we're going to be looking for here, but there's other things I want to go over. But if you wanted to use a different chart of some sort, like a pie chart or a scatter plot, something along those lines, a line graph, you can switch it as much as you need. Now, again, we've already defined some of these, like a line graph in this situation wouldn't make any sense. Remember, a line graph is a quantitative value that's measured over a certain amount of time. So again, there's a column chart or a bar chart, kind of the same thing, just different ways to represent the data. Again, you have a pie chart if you'd like. We'll look at that later. A scatter plot. Again, a scatter plot we haven't actually talked about, but as you can see, it doesn't totally make sense to make a scatter plot. And then there's just different options of things that you can make. I don't know what the map does, but I'm assuming that we don't have the necessary information. It looks like everything's blank. So it allows you to pick really whatever you want, but it also will default to assume what you're trying to do. And in this case, it defaulted to the correct type of distribution, which was a bar chart. Now, as long as you highlight the correct information. The rest of this stuff isn't necessarily going to, like this data range, you aren't necessarily going to have to change. Now, what you could change is, as you see here, like the x-axis, it says grade earned already. You could edit that and change that. But again, as long as you have highlighted the correct information, you shouldn't need to change much of this stuff. But if you go to customize, so there's data, it's kind of the basics, and then if you customize it, this is where we can get fancy, okay? Now, for our purposes, I'm just gonna ask that you are able to create this stuff, but I do wanna make sure that we understand the different things that we should have on our graph. And so what I'm gonna be going through is just different things that you can do. So background color, if you wanted to make your graph a different color, the background of it, obviously you could. If you wanted to change the font, Comic Sans is always a good one. And then these things, like 3D, that makes it look nice. Maximize, makes it kind of zoom in into the biggest size possible. Compare mode, it doesn't do anything right now because we don't have anything to compare it to, but that's another option. Your chart titles and axes. So here's one piece or one area that we need to make sure that we do, okay? Back when you first learned about data representations, naming and having titles was one of the most important things so that people know what they were looking at, okay? And so right now your chart title is blank. So let's put something in there. Let's just put test 1 scores, okay? And let's just keep the Comic Sans theme. That's always nice. You can change it to be bigger or smaller font, whatever you want there. You could put it so that it's in the middle. You can change the color of the text, choose a nice bright pink, you can bold it, so you have a bunch of different formatting options. Okay, so that's under chart and axis titles. Now, if you want to change so you can name or label the axes, if you click where it says chart title, first of all, you can give it a subtitle. So underneath, if you wanted to, this test was given on 12/1. All right, you could do that, and it's kind of hard to see. Let's make it there. We go. Now we can see it. Put it in the center, so you can make a little subtitle there. If you, and again, you should have this, but the horizontal axis title. So we call it grade earned, just because that's what we used on the thing. Again, you could change the size, you could bold it, you could put it in the center, and let's stick with the pink theme. I like that. Then you have the vertical axis title. That is, in this case, we'll call that the frequency because that's the number of times that that particular grade was earned. And let's stick with the theme that we have going here. So we will do that. Let's make it a little bigger so I can actually see. And since I made that bigger, there we go. That's looking good. And so again, just right, it's easy to miss. Right where it says type, you can switch between the different types of titles that you should have. Now again, on any sort of data representation, you should have a title for the overall graph. You don't need a subtitle. You could if you'd like, but then you should have a title for each axis. So overall graph, title for each axis, and then we haven't talked about this yet, but your legend should be labeled. All right, so going down the list, so that was the second option down, chart and axis titles. The next one is series. Series will allow you to change the color of the bars. So go a nice green color. You can change what side the numbers are on. Now, typically, we're on the left axis. You don't need to worry about these three things. You won't use those for a basic distribution. Underneath legend, you can reposition it. You could say there's none, but again, we should always have a legend. Put it on the top, bottom, left, right. And you could put it inside. Now, I would never put it inside. Just not a good spot to put it, but anywhere else is fine. I'll put it on the top one. Well, again, you could change things to be different sizes. That seems a little bit big. There we go. We can bold it if we'd like. We could make it a nice pink color like the rest of the text. Now your horizontal axis, this is looking at the like the actual numbers that you see there. So you can bold those. You could make those pink. It does not change it. Oh, I'm sorry, that's changing the font there again. So you could do something like that. Oh, I'm sorry, no, horizontal. That's A, B, C, D, and F. So you see that. Then there's the vertical axis, and it's the same thing. You could bold that. You could make those numbers pink there. Now, here's where you could do some edits. Again, Google kind of does this for you. It's already assumed your minimum and maximum value, but if you wanted to change that, you could. You could change the default counting, but again, it's already at a good number for that. And then the last thing you could do is change the grid lines that you have. Okay. And we could do like a darker, there we go, that makes it a little better, less, but you could do a minor grid line where you just put one right in the middle, or you could put two in the middle, or two in between, put five in between, and you could do whatever you really wanted to. Okay. And then, as you can see, this has been updating the whole time, and this is your, if you X out of the chart editor, this is your graph. Okay, so you can drag it around on your sheet, you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller. If you want to go back and edit any of the settings, just right click and hit edit chart. There's some other options here that you could do. You could save it as an image to import it into a Google presentation or any other presentation or a website. And so that's kind of the gist of a bar graph. All right, you drag and drop, make it different size. Okay, again, for right now, I know I showed you a lot of stuff. All I'm really worried about is that you're able to actually create it. So if you want to leave all the colors and everything the same, that's fine. But remember, minimum requirement is that you have a good scale. So make sure your scales are good. You have a title up here. You have a legend. And then you have titles on each axis. So as you saw, our graph didn't have a lot of those titles to begin with. So although Google does a good job of doing everything else, it's not going to always give you a title to work with. And so there will be some editing you need to do, but in terms of the colors and the fonts and everything like that, you don't need to worry. Okay. So if the other thing I want to show you is if you want to make a bar graph on the same, or compare two different distributions in the same bar graph, I just highlight both of these columns here. And another thing you can do instead of going to insert chart is you can right click and they've taken that away since the last time you used it. So, okay, so then just highlight, I guess, and go to insert chart again. And again, at this point, Google has identified that you are using two different data sets. And so it stacks them differently, even labeled them over here. Again, as you see, we're missing some titles. So at the very least, we would want to go to your chart title and just name it test 1 versus test 2. Then go to the horizontal axis, and again, that is the grade earned. Vertical axis is the frequency. And I mean, for the most part, that's, if you want to know what is the minimum I have to do, that's it. You have a title, you have labeled your axes. Again, Google has defaulted to a good scale for both of your graphs. And then your test 1 and test 2 distribution, your legend is right over here. So at a minimum, this is what I would expect to see. Okay? So that's for a bar graph. Once you know how to create a bar graph, it's going to be pretty self-explanatory to create the rest. Okay, I'm just going to move this down here. I did part C there, create a bar graph that puts both test scores in the same graph. The one thing I didn't do is make a test 2 distribution, but it's the same as test 1. So now let's go to pie chart. So on the bottom of this sheet, if you just click on the new tab, we're using the same data set here, but this time I'm going to make a pie chart. And you've kind of already seen this. But if I click grade earned and highlight the test 1 distribution, go to insert chart. Now this time I don't want a column, but I want to actually make a pie chart. Okay. Again, a lot of what we need is already there for us. Everything's labeled. We just need a title for the graph. Now, your customized menu looks Your customized menu looks a little bit different. No, there you go. It doesn't have as many options. So your first one says chart style. And again, I'm just going to go through this whole thing so that you can see the different options. But we have some very basic requirements of what you need to do. So you can change the background color again. You can change the font. You can make it 3D and make it look nice. Clicking on pie chart, the next option down. It's actually kind of interesting. You can make different size donut holes in the middle if you'd like. You can label your slices. And so and we talked about this in the previous set of notes, that sometimes it's better to know a percentage over a value. Okay. Now in this case, Google actually gives you the option of both. And I would say, let's use both. If we can give a percentage and a value, let's do that. Okay. Now, here's one downside of using the donut hole. Looks like because the blue part is so big, we can fit it there, but the other ones don't. So no matter how cool we think the donut hole is, let's see if we can get the other data to say that in there. Okay, either way, the other data is not big enough in this case, so if you want to leave your donut hole, you can. My point being is that we should always double check. If we can get that data in there and sacrifice the the graph looking cool, then we should do that. All right. So in this case, I'm going to leave the donut hole because I said even if I go to 0, these numbers still don't automatically show up. But as you can see, if I just highlight those sections, it comes up for me that way. You have your axes titles, your chart title. Again, we should always use that. Just this information. There we go. Now we have that title. You can change all the fonts and the sizes and everything just like last time. Again, that's not something that we necessarily require you to do. We'll go to that. Going to the series, so here's where you can actually change the color for each grade. So for an A right now it's blue, but if you want it to be orange, you could change that. And then B right now is red, but if you wanted that to be green, you could change that. And C is also orange, so we should change that to a blue. Why not? D is green. It's not on there. It's a darker green, but it's not on there anyway. Change that to like a maroon. And F is purple. We can just leave that as purple. But under the series, you can change those different colors. And now for your legend, because everything is labeled the way it is, that's what labeled means. There isn't really a formal legend, but if you wanted something like that at the top, you could have that. But again, I like labeled because now that I've done that, I don't see the percentages. So now I see the percentages, and there we are. Okay. Again, that's kind of it with pie charts. Again, the basic information is that you have your title and then you have your values or your percentages at least listed over here, if not your values as well as you can. Now, again, notice the same thing would have happened with the bar graphs, that as you hover over these things, it actually does tell you the number that's in the distribution. So it's not the end of the world if it doesn't show. But again, the idea is that you're going to use these skills in like a workplace where you might be presenting to people that don't have access to hover their mouse over. So you would want to provide them with the information so that they can see it. Okay. Again, I'm going to skip this part for test 2 because it'd be more of the same thing. And so let's get to the histogram. Now the histogram, like I said earlier, is going to allow us to represent a range of values. And so just click and highlight everything for test 1. Now don't go too far down, but just stop at last score and go to insert chart. And again, Google will try to do its best to make a suggestion on what type of graph you should use. In this case, they've suggested a line graph, which is not a good idea at all. And so we want to change that so that we can get a histogram. Okay, so if you go down to other, and not column or bar chart, but if you go down to other, it's going to give you a histogram. And again, it defaults to a lot of what you already need. Okay, and so just to reiterate here, what I'm going to do is just give you the basics, because when I go to customize, I see a lot of the same things. Again, all I need is correct labels. So I'm going to go right down to where it says chart axis and titles. Okay, I might be a little bit more specific at the top and say chart 1 distribution. Then go to the horizontal and maybe call it the range of scores, because that's what it is, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 20 to 25, etc. Then go to the vertical, and again with these, we usually call them a frequency. And then in this case, I do want to fix the legend, because the legend actually isn't correct at all. It says directions copied, for whatever reason, it interpreted this top part as part of the legend. So I do want to go down to there, and maybe I have to click in here. Edit that. Oh, it does say the count. So you know what? We would, in this case, it's fine if we just left it. Let's go to series. There it is. So for the series, it's not going to change it still. So I guess Google is another thing that's changed since the last time I used this, is that you can't edit what's in there. So it does say down here at the very end, test 1 count. For whatever reason, the way that we did it, it also included the directions in there. But other than that, again, look at your chart here. It automatically defaults to a good kind of range of numbers, counting by 5s. And we have our title, we've labeled our axes. And so again, that would be the minimum number that we want there. Okay. So a lot of different things that you can do with your data representations. But again, I'm just asking you to basically be able to do the basics. Make it, have the correct labels, and that's all you're going to be asked to do. Okay. From here, I want you to just practice submitting it, because this will not be the only time that we submit something like this. And so make sure you, when you submit, read these directions. Again, big red writing, don't share it with me, but read those directions. And I also don't want you to submit it from resources, because then the formatting gets all messed up and I can't really see your graphs. So when you share it with me, I want you to just copy and paste the link under the Create tab when you hit Submit. Okay? Basically, just follow these directions word for word, and you will be all set.